Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoyed the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Hi, everybody. I had a completely different plan for this week's podcast, and actually it all went to hell in a handbasket. So I thought I would change the plan. And actually what I'll talk about is thematically the importance of flexibility, because that's exactly what I had to kind of revisit this week when things went slightly awry for me in terms of podcast planning. And it's an important thing, because how flexible are you? Give yourself some real thought about that. How flexible are you when stuff goes wrong for you, when you're planning something and you're thinking about different options? All those kind of things are worth thinking about from a leadership point of view. Why did this come about for me? Well, I was originally due to be at home all this week, and I had time to do the podcast and to edit a guest podcast that I've already done, and that was all going to be fine. And then at very, very short notice, I had to drive my 83-year-old uncle up to Scotland for an event. So 3 days out, day up, day back, and a day up there for the event. And I thought, okay, no problem. That's easy. I'll take my laptop. I can do some work up there, and I can just get on and edit the podcast. And unfortunately, for reasons that I have yet to fathom, the computer didn't play. So that didn't work. And I got basically Friday afternoon, I was sat there trying to work through getting the podcast edited, and got immensely frustrated because it just didn't work. And again, I think it gave me pause for thought to revisit this, because it is such a thing that I think you need to be conscious of your own style and the way you put yourself across to other people, the way you act in yourself as well. How inwardly frustrated you get when things don't go quite the way you want them to, and how adaptable are you to overcoming that, or does it derail you if you don't overcome it? In this case, I just accepted, okay, fine, I can't do that, let's do something else. So I did some other stuff, and then I got back home yesterday, and this morning I'm sitting down to do the podcast just before it has to get issued on a Sunday, because it always goes out Sunday at lunchtime. So obviously I thought, right, I can't do the guest episode. I haven't got time to do the editing for that. So therefore, a shorter thematic episode will be the way ahead. And here we are. So that's why I'm talking about it. And again, I think I'm just encouraging you to kind of reflect on how you deal with those kind of things, because I think personally, it's really important. For the team, it's really important as well. If you have a team of people working for you, around you, you being a flexible leader makes a very big difference to them. And I'd like to think most people think they're flexible. I think they do think generally that they have a good deal of flexibility, and that they're adaptable, and they don't get frustrated by things, and they can overcome this stuff easily. But I'm not too sure that's the reality for a lot of people in real life. I think everybody at some point gets frustrated and challenged and annoyed and irritated. And how you show that, how that manifests itself to your family, if it's a personal thing, or your friends, or indeed your team, is important, because I think it's something that you want to show from a positive side, that you are as flexible as you can actually be, and that you are able to be adaptable, overcome challenges, and just move on. And if you are, it's helpful to other people. Obviously, if someone stays calm, keeps their head, just comes up with a different solution, and then moves to whatever's going to happen. Panicking, getting frustrated, getting angry, achieves next to nothing. So that's why I thought it was worth a conversation. I mentioned the friends and family side, because this is just as important for your personal life as it is for your professional life. And I think the two bleed into each other sometimes. If you're frustrated in professional life, and then that often cross-pollinates into your personal life, and vice versa. So again, thinking about how you are going to respond in those two different environments when plans have to change, and how you're going to protect one environment from the other, and not bring stuff home from work or take stuff from home into work, etc., is again something to give yourself a little bit of pause. How good am I at that? Am I someone who actually does really carry this stuff from the breakfast table into the office, or do I actually find it very easy to compartmentalize and not do that? And again, people are variable. So you have to look at what you do and how that translates. But you definitely want to be thinking about the positive side of this is staying calm, staying adaptable, avoiding being angry, avoiding being frustrated with yourself and or with others. And this is true whether it's the planning stage of something that you're in, or actually whether it's in execution. You're doing it, you're on the journey, and suddenly something goes wrong. And we've all experienced this. If you're driving somewhere and there's an unplanned road closure that you didn't know about, and suddenly that's going to not only cause you to divert, but it's going to cause you significant time delay, etc. That's going to interrupt your plans and change things. How do you handle that? How do you physically think about that? Do you sort of just instantly go, yeah, adapt, move on, and that's fine, and it's just to kind of shit happens, move on? Or are you one of these people that really gets anxious about it, quite angry by it, frustrated by it, and can't move on from it very easily, and then that anger or anxiety boils over into affecting other people as well? We had an expression in the military that I think is really true, which is no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And I think that's really is true. I think you have to be mindful that whatever plan you have, it has to then survive contact with whatever you're doing with that plan. If you have a beautiful plan, as we did, to drive to and from Scotland over the last few days, and then suddenly you find out, as we did on the way up to Scotland, that the M25, the major motorway around London, is closed at one of the major junctions on the weekend. So we're coming back on the Saturday. You have to adapt. You have to come up with an alternative plan. And that's something you want to keep in mind, I think, through everything, is having contingency plans. Contingency plans and a sort of a plan B, plan C, plan D kind of option are really, really important. Don't let yourself be totally reliant on one specific plan, and it has to be that plan or nothing else. If you can possibly avoid it, just occasionally you may not be able to do that, but by and large you can come up with some alternatives. Because if you can, it automatically builds in flexibility into what you're doing, and that will really, really help. And another great military expression, a very Air Force one, was flexibility is the key to air power, because actually it was all the time that you were having to adapt and change because things changed. You had different numbers of airplanes, the weather changed, the target planning changed, the enemy responded in a different way, whether it was a practice enemy or a real enemy. All these things forced you to think about how responsive you were and how flexible you were in the way that you were going to adapt what had been up to that point a very robust plan, which has now been completely torn apart by something going on early on in the process, or indeed in the middle or towards the end of the process. You need to think really hard about any of those stages. What can I actually do to make sure that I'm minimizing the impact of anything like that on anything that I am doing? Because you just don't want that derailer. You don't want to be in a position where suddenly you haven't thought about it. One way of doing this is most definitely using a thing called red teaming if you're working in a teaming environment, and particularly professionally. And what red teaming involves is essentially having an alternative team of people or even one or two people who will actually know about what you're trying to do. They have the skills, they'll have the knowledge to turn around and look at your plan once your plan is fully formed and stress test it, and essentially look at trying to tear it apart, find the weak spots, with a view to not being critical about it, but with a view to strengthening it, with a view to finding a way to beef up what you're doing so that actually when your plan actually is put into action, you've got those contingency plans already in place. You've thought through some of the what ifs. If you spend time doing that and you actually spend time analyzing all the different options, that really makes a difference. From a professional setting, think about this in terms of going into a meeting, whether it's a pitch meeting or any other important meeting, where you want to turn around and make sure you've thought through what might happen in this meeting. How might the other side of the table react to what you're saying? How might they ask questions? What kind of questions might they ask? What happens if they ask you a question that is really difficult and is going to challenge the planning that you've put in place? Thinking through all those things in advance, not in the moment, will make you feel calmer in the moment. It'll make you more flexible in the moment because you've kind of already been there. We've already done that and we've actually got some experience. Experience obviously helps. If you've been through this before, you've had a similar situation that's occurred to you before, then that obviously makes life easier. And it's why, generally speaking, practice makes perfect. If you've done stuff several times and it's not necessarily gone well the first few times, hopefully it progressively gets better. And you've seen the things that can go awry and have a view as to how you can improve it. In the team environment, I think one of the other things is really being amenable to feedback and acting on it. Human nature is generally that you think, right, I'm the leader, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and you just instinctively, almost certainly have a plan for what you're going to do. But is your plan the best plan? Probably not. Is it flexible enough to adapt to inputs from others? That's what you need to think about, and you need to try and make sure it is. There really isn't any room for the my way or the highway kind of approach in real leadership unless you absolutely have no option. I think it's fair enough to turn around and say, right, we'll have a robust debate with your team. And then if actually you're in a leadership hierarchy and you're at the top of it, you turn around and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Even if you don't necessarily all agree, look at governments. Ultimately they have collective responsibility generally for the decisions that are made in their in cabinet, etc., where they should come out of those meetings, even if they don't agree with the outcome that's been discussed, and they own it, they accept it, they take it. They know that that's the outcome they've got to actually turn around and deliver and go forward with. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing. But you want to be, as a leader, listening to the team. That's why you've got the team. Hopefully you've got a team that is actually bringing you different opinions. They're not all mini-me's. They're people who are actually offering you advice and input and hopefully strengthening your plan. And it's definitely better as a leader if you listen first and then offer your own view. If you go in and offer your own view, then the chances are that obviously you're going to overly influence the team that are sat there, and they're going to feel, particularly if you're a strong kind of or relatively authoritarian, and I use the word advisedly, I'm not advocating authoritarian leadership, but if you're a strong character, they will think the boss wants to do it this way, so therefore that's what we'll do. And that's often not that helpful. So you definitely want to be listening first and then actually thinking about, right, okay, that's a really good idea. Let's input that. How can we input that into the plan? How can we adapt the plan to be able to take it forward? That's true both in the planning stage of anything and also in the execution phase. If you're doing something and it's gone wrong and you're the leader of the team, are you the only one that can fix it? For sure not. You need to think about who else is in the team, who has the expertise, who's been there before. How can I tap into that knowledge? How can I make sure that we're bringing that full knowledge spectrum, if you like, into the fix for moving forward? Staying optimistic is really important here too. I mean, if you're naturally optimistic, as certainly I am, I can find sometimes this can be a problem. If you get derailed because something's gone badly wrong, as happened to me this week, it can be very frustrating, and it can actually knock you back a little bit because you think, oh no, this was my whole plan has gone to hell. This is a personal thing. There's only me can fix this. How can I actually do it? But it is really important to try and stay optimistic and be realistic. There are going to be some lulls. You're going to have some dips in that. You're going to go to feeling a bit flat for a while, but then bounce back. Remember, you're an optimistic person, and build back to that normal optimism. If you're a natural pessimist, that's obviously good on one level, that you might be better at actually thinking through the contingency plans. But don't just be one of these people that thinks it's all going to fail, it's never going to work, and therefore we're doomed from the outset. You need to obviously be applying your most optimistic self to it to try and have a good, robust plan. But then obviously, if it goes a bit wrong, don't disappear into deep pessimism straight away. Look at how can we bring this back to get it back on track? Because you don't want to crumble at the first sign of a problem. You need to firmly be thinking about, how do I adapt? How do I overcome? How do I actually work through my own frustration, work through the frustration of my team, and still continue to deliver the mission? And essentially, again, if you look at it as an end goal of whatever that is, whether it's a short-term goal or a reasonably long-term goal, am I still progressing towards that goal? Am I moving in the right direction? Because if I am, then actually I'm hopefully being reasonably flexible about how I do that. Again, keeping the end in mind and beginning with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey said in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think is really, really important here. You need to think about, what is the end goal? How do I now get to that end goal? There will be more than one route It definitely won't be there's a single option that's the only option you can pursue and there's no other possible way of achieving this. There are loads of analogies you can use here. I mean, sporting ones and sort of expedition mountaineering kind of ones, all those sorts of things where you look at how people have to overcome and be flexible about severe challenges, in some instances, life-threatening kind of challenges, where you need to think about how am I going to ensure that I am not going to get completely crushed by something that goes wrong, particularly in the middle of the activity. And often that flicks back to that planning point. You need to have the plan that you got in place with enough contingency around it. You need to be thinking about the plan A, plan B, plan C. Again, in the military life, we used to think a lot about estimates, we called it, where we had an estimate process where you were looking at what the aim was, selection and maintenance of the aim was principle of war number 1. And then you would aim for that, you'd have a plan, and then you'd start thinking about what we call branches and sequels. So when things went wrong or changed, then what could we do as an alternative? And ultimately, you also had a kind of thing we would call a question 4 moment. Question 4 on the estimate was the situation has changed. The whole position has changed. What are we now going to do? We're not going to turn around and completely crumble at this point. We're going to think about how do we adapt the plan to now move to the new situation. And that may well be the case for the sort of examples I was talking about a minute ago that are simple ones where you're driving from A to B and suddenly the road you're going down is blocked. That's definitely the situation's changed. You've got to think about how you're going to get around that and resolve it. But equally, some much more complex personal and professional settings, all of that is still relevant. And thinking about being really objective with yourself about how flexible you actually are, I think is something that will definitely help you as a leader, because the more you build that in and the more you try and develop a really flexible approach to doing business, the more impactful you're likely to be as a leader, the more your team are likely to respect you because you're listening to their inputs, you're taking their inputs, you're adapting to their inputs and changing the plan as a result of their inputs. And that really matters. They all really care. If you just turn around and don't listen to anybody, lots of other great ideas are coming in. You go, no, we're going to do it this way. And you're demonstrating no flexibility. You're back to that my way or the highway approach. Then the team are not going to follow you very much with that. They're going to get frustrated. They're going to get angry. There ultimately will be dissent within the team, and there may actually be a complete breakdown within the team. So you just don't want that. You don't want to be in that situation. You want to try very hard to think about how can I improve the overall outcome here for everybody involved, including me. And I think it's a really important leadership trait, and I think it's one of the things that is worth you thinking about. As I say, I didn't plan to do this podcast this week, so I'm going to keep it quite short. I'm hopeful that this is useful thoughts for you, just to, even if you are a very flexible leader, just think about dusting that off a little bit and going, how flexible am I? What have I actually done recently that's really demonstrated some flexibility? And am I good at this, or is it an area I need to put a bit more focus into? And I'll see you again very soon, hopefully with a guest episode next week. All the very best. Thanks a lot, and appreciate you listening as ever. Bye now. I really hope you've enjoyed this short episode talking about flexibility and the things that maybe you want to think about as a leader to improve your flexibility and just kind of test yourself and measure yourself as to how flexible you are. If you have enjoyed it, then please share it. Please push it out to other people. It's a short episode, so it might be of interest to people just to whet their appetites into the podcast generally. Like it, share it, feedback on it, all those sorts of things that are really, really helpful to me and to the podcast in general. So I would really appreciate it if you would do that for me. If you find this kind of input and these thoughts valuable, then as I've said before, please think about actually supporting the show financially and going either through the support the show link on your podcast platform or going to www.patreon.com/leading4life. And you'll then find the option to become a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show. And at varying price points, you'll then be able to really help out what I do on a weekly basis. And if you can do that, I would be really appreciative. Even if you can't do that, I'm appreciative of you listening, and I'm very grateful to you. So thanks very much indeed. See you again very soon.